Raj. Welcome to the show, and thanks for taking time out of your busy day to share your journey, the lessons you've learned along the way, and in some big or small ways, all add up to where you are today. So, really looking forward to learning from your journey.
Thank you, Rahul. I'm very happy to be here and glad to see you again.
Excellent. So, let's start at Intel and VMware. You were a fellow, which I understand is the highest technical role inside a company. And so, what does that mean, and how do you intersect with other organizations within the company?
Yeah, so I think there are two experiences I have, one at Intel and one at VMware, which is slightly different. That Intel, the role of the technical fellow, especially when I was appointed a fellow, this was Andy Grove, Craig Barrett era of the company, there were very few fellows. And the criteria was that you must have shown consistently an ability to make a strategic impact on the company in terms of driving new directions and so on.
Hmm.
So that time, I think what I had done was I was in networking business as Intel, and we first tried to do merchant silicon for networking fabrics. But that project got canned, so some of us started brainstorming and came up with this idea of programmable network processors that became a new product category, and Intel was one of the leading vendors for that. So that's how I sort of got a position to be an Intel fellow. When I went to VMware, the criteria there are very few fellows. There are two founding fellows, and there were two more fellows appointed. And there, I think they wanted to recognize people who are already industry leaders, have impact,
Hmm.
and how they could help paper. So it's sort of different criteria, different rule. Both the places, I think, in Intel, I was an individual contributor. So you have to influence across the company to get what you want, right? You don't have the resources directly available to you.
Mm.
Whereas at VMware, I was given an opportunity to do a startup basically within VMware. So that's a very different
Interesting.
experience where I owned
Yeah.
architecture, product management, engineering. But Intel was really, it was cross group influencing and continuously convincing people to invest in something that you believe. So that's a very different role.
Yeah. And so, going back to that, in terms of influence, how did you intersect and interact with other functions, and what was that like? Would love to get a sense of that.
Sure. It wasn't very easy, I must tell you. I must admit, it's not very easy, especially Intel has a tribal culture. Every tribe protects its stuff. But so I think the idea is to find like minded people, make sure they participate in the idea creation. They feel like they own the idea, co own the idea. And then only you
Hmm.
get bottom up support to go to the engineering managers, product leaders to socialize the idea and get it. That was the biggest thing. So I did a lot of mentoring of junior technical people, right? Since I was a fellow, people always looked up to me and said, "How do I become a fellow?" So I
Hmm.
wanted to help them become principal engineers, senior principal engineers, which was the technical ladder. And that sort of mentoring created sort of a network of people who believe in you and they're willing to work with you. So that was the trick at Intel.
Interesting. So, as a fellow, and you are looking ahead to emerging technologies and potential opportunities, how far of a horizon do you look at?
Yeah, so Intel had this process every year called strategic long range planning or SLUG,
Hmm.
where the idea was the horizon look at was 3 years, not beyond that. That you looked at 3 to 5 years, they said, but it practically became 3 years. And it happened every year in May. And then the output of that fed into business planning. So that was a critical junction where product managers, engineers, architects came together. We even used to have face to face, and different people will come up with different hypotheses based on
Okay.
what trends you see. And that was a great mechanism and process to use.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember in 2010, Intel acquired McAfee, and
Correct.
I was at McAfee at the time, leading product management for global threat intelligence. And I came across a white paper that was about Intel's vision for cloud computing by the year 2020. They
Yeah.
had a 10-year vision for cloud computing and Intel's role in it. Curious to understand, how does a 10-year vision get built up within the organization? How did that come about?
So that was a very interesting thing, right? It was done for multiple topics based on where the things were evolving. So 2010 example is very good because 2007, actually Amazon Web Services collaborated with Intel in terms of data center architecture and server. I was part of some of that. So idea was to always paint a 10-year vision, understanding fully well that you may not be accurate, to at least analyze what are the challenges you're likely to face and what are the opportunities. So I always found that exercise very useful, especially if it's done cross functional. It's not just by technical people. There's some product
Hmm.
people. There are people. Intel that time was investing heavily, starting in 2004, in the area of user experience. These were social scientists
Hmm.
who went and spent time in different places. For example, to understand the PC's future, they went and spent time in remote villages of India or other Asian countries to
Wow.
Africa to understand what are their requirements. And they also were part of such a vision creation process, which was a very powerful idea in my opinion.
That's very interesting because as at Intel, you tend to think about everything under the hood in Intel Inside, as they say, but then to have learnings from different parts of the world to understand how this technology, the PC computing platform, is going to evolve, the
That's right.
use cases that that's going to bring up, and where does the plumbing need to go along with it. So that's
Yeah.
fascinating.
And also, it was very interesting that initially, when it started, many of us, including me, were skeptical. You're talking to social scientists; they have no
Hmm.
idea about what technology. So, you're talking to people at a very different plane. But so over time, I came to appreciate what they bring to it because they thought of things that we never thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this ability to look ahead, what sort of went into that thought process, and just being able to look forward to that horizon, looking around corners, anticipating change in the environment around you at a macro level,
Right.
industry level, right? How did you build that ability?
So I think one advantage I had that I did a brief stint in academia before joining industry as a researcher and a professor. And there, I think you're constantly thinking of new ideas, which nobody has thought about because the competitive pressure when you're a tenure track professor or even you're tenure to get funding, to get grants requires you to think like that. So that mindset, I had an advantage. When I went to industry, the other thing I started doing is I always like to ask questions. Now, people found me irritating sometimes because I'll always question everything,
Hmm.
challenge people on every assumption. And that doesn't go very well. People don't like it. But that was my way of understanding. Because otherwise, what happens? You think very incrementally. You go talk to some customers, you look at the competition, you thought of next incremental feature roadmap. And if you have that mindset, you forget the bigger picture. So I think, and the other thing I always did is, which I always tell our product managers to do, that talk to your architects. They are not your sort of competitors, but they have sort of a very complementary role. But also, I used to very actively look at academic research,
Hmm.
especially DARPA grant proposals, requests for proposals. DARPA always thinks way ahead, and they have use
Yeah.
cases only for military. You think, but all those technologies has created Silicon Valley, lots of them, right? I can
Yeah.
tell silicon photonics, a lot of stuff in semiconductor. So always paying attention to their requests for proposals and what they're doing on conferences also helps you understand where the trends are going.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. So fast forward from there, and then you came to VMware, where you said that it was a slightly different role as a fellow, but
Yeah.
you had the opportunity to do a startup within VMware. Tell us about that
So in
experience.
2013, VMware had already tried to build its own public cloud called White Cloud Air, and it was not a successful thing. And people were very worried about VMware because VMware did not have a cloud story.
Hmm.
People were leaving and stuff like that. So when I joined, coming from Intel, people are a little bit skeptical. Is this software guy? Is this a chip guy? Because if you come from Intel, everybody thinks you're a chip guy, and I'm a distributed systems networking software. So my bosses, Raghu, who's now the CEO, and Ray, they were two in a box. Ray especially told me, Raj, you're a new guy. You have a clean slate. Why don't you go and figure out what should we do with cloud? Okay, I took the challenge, and one of the advantages VMware has, the customers really like VMware. So I went on
Hmm.
this tour to visit customer. I went to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities. There are so many VMware customers, about 10 of them. I spent a
Hmm.
week there to understand what the problems are. And VMware had sort of defined a new vision called software-defined data center. The whole data center is software defined, right?
Hmm.
And we have about 7 products in network virtualization, compute virtualization, storage virtualization, all monitoring, analytics, all that. All
Hmm.
those 7 products had to be integrated to create a private cloud. And customers' complaint was that was too much. They had to pay millions of dollars for professional services, 3 to 6 months, to bring it together. So I came back and wrote a 5-page white paper that we should all automate with the vision bring up the private cloud in less than a day,
Mm.
from 3 to 6 months. That's a pretty audacious vision. And Raghu said, okay, you can go try, you can take some 4 or 5 people and create a POC. So by end of the year, this was happened in March, April. By
Mm-hmm.
December first week, we brought the same customers down from Minneapolis to Palo Alto and showed them a 2 rack full of servers. Everything could be brought up automatically. And that demonstration was just to gauge the reaction that we
Yeah.
can build private cloud. It was all, put together with toothpicks and gum. It was like a prototype
Right.
demo. It was not, but they liked it, and they told Raghu, who was the chief product officer that time, yeah, this is something will really help. That time he gave me the funding. So at that point, it became a startup because I was an architecture product management engineer, and that was turned out to be my best professional experience. And now that
Interesting.
product is more than $1 billion in revenue, right?
Yeah.
It's only an organically created product outside of vSphere where the company was founded. It was a very good experience. Yeah, very different. It was like a senior VP slash fellow title because I was also managing plus doing technical.
Yeah. So let me pull the thread a little bit on those trips to Minneapolis and conversations with customers. Love to hear your experience in terms of keeping a balance between listening to customers too much versus pitching your idea and getting their response and see how they react. You can never really trust what customers tell you. Their behavior is actually going to be more aligned with the reality.
Yeah, yeah. So I think my experience in that particular thing was you do not want to take everything they say as the truth, right? You have to start asking questions to what is underneath it. So,
Hmm.
for example, when we talk to VP level people in infrastructure owning people, their requirements, their needs are very different than you talk to 2 levels down, who are people who are operating the data center or bringing VMware things together. So, distinguishing between what kind of input you hear from every level is very important. And the second, I think you have to some extent, be a little bit confident to the point of being arrogant. That you have to think that I know better in terms of
Hmm.
what problem to solve, as long as I know what the problem is. Whereas
Hmm.
customers will tell you not just a problem, but the solution they want.
Right.
And that's what you have to separate up. And that's very hard to do. And I made lots of mistakes, I can tell you, in the process to learn that over the years. Yeah.
So, as you've been building these infrastructure level technologies, embedded as well as cloud based infrastructure and so on, in order for product managers to be successful in collaborating with engineering, what have you seen in terms of the attributes product managers have or need to have? How technical they need to be in being able to have credible conversations with super technical people, engineers, fellows like yourself.
Yeah. So I think the product managers, the credibility always depends on how close they are to the technology and engineering, right? The best product managers I have seen, understand technology and they interact with engineers at their thinking level. At the same time, making sure they abstract out things what they want. That's most important thing. I see nowadays product management is discipline where people enter it from engineering side, marketing side, sales
Hmm.
side, right? And you see different characteristics of people, right? Whereas sales engineers becoming product managers and engineers becoming product managers tend to have technical background.
Hmm.
But I've seen some people coming from marketing who take time to sit down and play with the product, play with the technology to understand, and they have a lot more credibility with engineers. The second part, I think I always found it useful and observed people, the word collaboration can be interpreted in multiple ways, right? Because it's not just question of making people feel good and interacting with them, but instead collaboration means that you all truly create a working group in which people bring their ideas and you brainstorm.
Hmm.
Best product management ideas I have seen happen when people have 2 3 hours sessions to bring together people, and you have to bring people from sales architecture, sales engineer, regular engineering, and a product management. You have to. I find the input coming from the sales engineering side very useful. People think, oh, they
Hmm.
are very short term focused. That's not true. They see the bigger picture many times that they're interacting with the customers.
Right. Yes, that's been my experience as well,
Yeah,
where people from sales engineering moving into product management have a much deeper appreciation for how that technology is being used by
yeah,
customers, the challenges that they face. They understand the customer side of implementation as well as the engineering side of development, and they are really able to bridge that very well.
Yeah. The best example I have with Jay Chaudhary is Zscaler CEO, a good friend of mine. He came with that background and has built some really successful companies.
So, as you were building this startup inside VMware, is now $1 billion business or over $1 billion business, and you went through the process of doing this prototype that was held together by rubber band and gum, and then additional funding to go through that. At what point in that journey did you feel that you had to take into account the P&L, the financial aspect of building the product? How did that become front and center for you?
So that was a big learning experience, right? Because first, once we went to sort of MVP status where we could go and try it out to the customers, we didn't have a sales force, right? Because the sales
Mhm.
guys were focused on selling the current products. This product
Mhm.
automated, so that eliminated some of the services revenue because there was no professional services required. So I think to make case to get go to market support, it's the first time in my life I had to understand the finance requirements. Okay, it's not
Mhm.
enough to get engineering budget. Now you have to go to other people and all, right? Luckily, we had hired a product manager from outside who had that prior experience. So we started interacting with the finance that required us to build a case for what the revenue roadmap looks like and how we are going to be able to generate the revenue, and that can be translated into PNL and build a PNL around it. And that I must tell you that this is where I think the VMware execs helped out by bringing in more professional managers who have experience
Mhm.
and so on. Now, I could not be relied upon just to do it by myself.
But that experience of knowing go to market strategy and all of that, how do engineers get a better understanding of what it takes to sell a product? Because a lot of times we focus heads down on building the product, adding new capabilities with every new release, understanding from customers. But the aspect of go to market and how do you sell and the sales process and the messaging that needs to go along with that value proposition. Tell us about your learnings and takeaways from that, and how do you think that can be part of what an engineering organization learns?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of learnings now. I apply them in my current job as a CTO. So one of the things early on I learned is that you have to build a close relationship with the finance counterpart because they are the ones who ultimately are going to help you do the analysis and their support is
Mhm.
necessary. The second part is you asked a very important question. Having a good idea product is not enough. How does it get to the market? How does it get sold? What's the
Mhm.
current go to market vehicle we have? Because you cannot invent a completely new go to market. The sales guys will not take it.
Mhm.
They have the quota, they are preoccupied with that. So you have to figure out the current go to market motion and how can you
Mhm.
ride on the back of that. Without that, it will not be. Now, sometimes in a game where I had given a sales overlay sales guys, three, four, just to
Yeah.
make it easier. Because they you bring them in, they have existing relationship with the existing sales force, they understand go to market. So that's another way you can ride on the back of the current go to market motion. But understanding the current go to market motion, right? So, for example, in case of VMware, the vSphere or NSX or vSun kind products were there, and they were sold in a particular way.
Mhm.
And you have to sort of find that your product, which is integrating this product, somehow sits at the back of that go to market motion. And
Mhm.
now in my current job, I try to do that because I'm basically incubating new products, right, as part of my thing. And I have to
Right.
start thinking about how I'm not going off far left somewhere, but it's more in conjunction with the current go to market motion. And
Right.
that's when you partner with sales engineering, sales architecture, and some of the friendly account managers who are willing to think out of the box.
Yeah, I was going to come to Juniper, so that's a good segue. So, in your role today as the CTO, what are some of the processes, rituals that you have as part of your organization? The long range planning, the annual planning cycles, and how do you engage engineering and product? And product does not report into you as the CTO, so that's a separate organization.
Yeah.
So how do you then bring that together with you and the chief product officer engaging your organizations into this long range planning as well as incubation for new ideas?
So one of the things I have started is a new process at Juniper. It's new for Juniper. I have done it before called Pathfinding and Incubation. So pathfinding is where we look for a funnel of ideas. The sources of those ideas can be any engineer, any sales engineer, sales architecture, product manager. I take this funnel of ideas and then we qualify them to which ones we should pursue based on a few criteria, like
Sure.
whether it's an adjacency to existing product, because then it's easier to go to market.
Hmm.
Right? You know, start with thinking about go to market. Is it going to have a bigger revenue opportunity? For me, another criteria is software. We are trying to increase the company's ARR revenue, software revenue.
Hmm.
So it has to be done. Once you do that, assign 2 to 4 people to an idea to try it out. To give them 3 4 months to come back with something. If that fits the requirements, then we make it a pathfinding project with actual number of people assigned to create
Hmm.
what I call minimum viable demo. It's idea based on MVP, but it's not quite MVP, but it's not a science fair demo that you throw it across the wall. Right?
Hmm.
It's basically something that you can actually deploy in a customer environment to do a pilot. So it
Okay.
has to be robust enough. And that is used to collect feedback before we decide whether it can go into business incubation or not. Business
Okay.
incubation will try to make it regular product with sales, revenue, and stuff like that. That's a decision I make with my CPO. That
Hmm.
decision is not mine. First phase is all mine, my resources, I can assign them. But incubation phase requires his buy-in because he sees now, aha, can be built into a new revenue generating product.
I like what you said about the minimum viable demo. The term minimum viable product, the MVP, has been so overused, abused, burdened. People get wound up in different shapes when you think about what is an MVP and what it is not. But this minimum viable demo, how did you come up with that?
So I think I was trying to think about it based on my experience at Intel. Like anytime you build something POC prototype, people will be very skeptical. How
Hmm.
robust it is? Is it just a science fair demo? Oh, what people you will. I have always heard comment. It's okay to do demo, but that's not a real product. So I wanted something that will gain credibility with internal stakeholders. The best thing is to go to customers, be have ask them to try it out, but they are not going to try it out unless it's robust enough, right? So that's why
Yeah,
this concept of MVD came about, and people have liked it. So far, I've gotten this really good responses to that. Recently, we did a pilot at for a completely new product I'm building at Equinix. It's a colo service they provide, and their feedback created some credibility to be able to take it to the next level.
excellent. So, coming back to that customer angle a little bit, all customers are not cut by the same piece of cloth. And whenever you are taking something new, a minimum viable demo to customers, you also want to have customers who are innovative, forward thinking. How do you get a sense of whether this is the right customer for the minimum viable demo or not?
Yeah, that's the hardest part because if you just talk to the infrastructure people and the people, um, they will be very polite. They will look at
Hmm.
it, but they may not adopt it. So I think finding the equivalent CTOs, equivalent function like that in other organization is very important because they are open to new ideas. When I was at Google Cloud, we tried to do a completely new product, and I still remember trying to sell that idea to many customers, and people were saying, "Solve your current problems first. You have currently you're not delivering what I want. I don't want to hear the new ideas." But I still remember one of the customers in South healthcare company. I really hit it off with the CTO, and he said, "Oh,
Hmm.
I would love to try." That helped a lot. If you find the right sales guys who are also a little bit forward, they know which of their customers who is likely to be more open to new ideas.
Right. Yeah. So, as a CTO, how do you embed this DNA into the organization of your habits about asking questions, being persistent with questions, ideas? So, how do you build that curiosity, innovative gene within the organization? How do you do that?
So I do two things. One is that every 2 weeks I have an extended staff, which is people at staff engineer level and above. They come, senior staff and all. And my rule is that I do not move forward in the meeting unless people ask questions. Either
Hmm.
call upon
Interesting.
people who are not asking questions. So the idea being this, because people tend to be very reluctant to ask questions, right? So you have to sort of encourage them by calling out people. And I
Hmm.
figured out that the 3 4 people who are always willing to speak. So use them as a starting point, then ask them to shut up and let the other people jump in, right? The second thing I do is that every about month or so we have all hands where we
Hmm.
actually present somebody. Comes and present the idea. And my rule is in that all hands, last two rows have to ask questions.
Hmm.
Because when I was a professor, I would not go forward in my teaching unless the questions came from the last rows, the two rows in the classroom. Because they're the most passive people and you're not sure they're even listening to you. But if you stop the class saying that, I'm not going to go forward until you ask a question, it's pretty embarrassing to people. And they will start speaking. So my team has gotten used to it now after 3.5. They know that, I know people by name, I'll ask them. So that sort of creates a culture of feeling okay to ask questions,
Yeah.
right? And be curious.
And then you also talked about this funnel of ideas, and that
Yeah.
ideas can come from anywhere,
Yeah.
any part of the organization. So, how do you encourage people to come up and contribute ideas? What do you use as a mechanism to create that funnel and then
Right.
evaluate that funnel?
So when I started this, I started almost acted like an evangelist. I'll volunteer to go to people's staff to present
Mhm.
this idea of pathfinding. There I would solicit ideas and tell them that I'm free to be approached and all. So one idea example I give is that there's a very smart sales architect in data center business, and he had the idea that there should be a pre-sales design tool to design a network fabric before we give our fabric. We're very proud of our fabric automation story and all that stuff. But he said, customers don't think like that. They start. So he came up with the idea. I put two engineers on it, and now that tool is now commercially available from for customers.
Mhm.
And I started advertising him every time I got a chance, not only present a success story, but his name and recognition for him. That encourages other people. So you have to
Right.
create the sense that you're celebrating other people for doing it.
Right. Excellent. So, we'll come to the lightning round of this particular podcast. Who are the leaders that you've admired and learned the most from?
For me, the most admired leader is Andy Grove. He was the amazingly strategic visionary, but also
Hmm.
extremely practical. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
he could look at the inflection points. I mean, he worked
Hmm.
with very closely with Clayton Christensen on his books, but also at the same time, he was not just a visionary strategy, but he knew how to implement or translate that into something pragmatic. And I
Yeah.
still remember he used to say that we have to disrupt ourselves before somebody else disrupts us. And
Yeah.
that he tried to follow all the time. He came up to Celeron. People say it's going to kill Pentium, but he said if you don't do Celeron, somebody else will do it. So we have to do it.
Right.
So for me, he's the most admired leader that I have followed and learned from in my entire career.
Yeah. You have quite a few collection of books there, and I'm sure that's only what we see on the screen here. I know you have a much bigger library. So, which is a book or two that you've recommended the most to people?
So the other admired leader, which I have followed very closely, is Ben Horowitz, right? And
Okay.
his book, "What You Do Is What You Are: How to Build Culture in a Business," is my favorite book. I recommend it to
Okay.
many people, gifted them. And the most important book for any leader, organizational leader, how to build organization, how to build teams, how to manage a project, is a book by Andy Grove, High Output Management. I must have given away so far as gifts to people 25, 30 copies of them.
Hmm.
This
Yeah.
is a Bible for anybody who builds a team and wants to be a good leader. So those two guys are my really role models, but they both the books are amazing.
Yeah. Excellent. What is a favorite interview question you like to ask when you are interviewing people?
What's the one single important mistake you made from which you learned the most? That question brings out so many interesting stories. And
Yeah.
it also shows the humility of the person to be able to remember what mistakes you made.
Yeah. By that same token, are you willing to answer that question?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, yes. I think many of the successes I've had, I believe that came serendipitously, not necessarily by plan. You just hit that idea. But I made lots of mistakes. So one of the mistakes I made that, sometimes you get so preoccupied or you love the idea you forget about whether it's practical or not and keep on pursuing it. This happened to me at Intel. I ended up wasting a lot of my time and other people's time and resources. But I learned a lot from that. Many times it's not the technology and idea. You have to also look at Look at it from the other end. Start from the other end. Start
Yeah.
from what use case you're trying to solve. Or how do you solve it? Is it useful for somebody or not? I'll briefly give an example. And this is Ronnie Friedman, who was a design manager at Intel Israeli, really educated me. I was very proud of the fact I had come up with something on a chip design. It's a sort of a called design for manufacturing test validation circuit that will save the area. And it would save the not the area, but save the number of people used for testing.
Hmm.
It will cost a little bit of area, but it will save about 40, 50 people. And this design manager explained to me, Raj, even if you save 100 people, he said, I don't care. And I was shocked. Why would a
Hmm.
design manager? Because he said, I make every product, we 100 to 200 million chips every year. If you save me even a half a centimeter square on that, a half a millimeter square, it's a lot of money for me. People
Yeah.
cost is fixed. I don't care. And until then, I was so proud of that. There's one example I give you. There are lots of such example I can give you. And I completely changed my perspective about how to think about the business, how to think about the
Yeah.
finances, how to think about what is matters to the product manager.
Yeah. It shows your humility, Raj, when you say that a lot of your successes have been serendipitous, but then what you really learn
I
from
truly believe.
mistakes
I,
and
I
yeah,
truly believe with examples I can give. Truly believe that.
yeah,
When you start out, it's very easy to look back and later on say I had a great vision, great strategy. But many of the times, you forget how many times things did not succeed.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. Well, I think this has been a fantastic conversation, Raj. Really insightful. Thank you for once again for taking the time to join me in this episode.
Thank you, and wonderful talking to you. So good luck. Thanks.
Thanks.